So we're going to go ahead and get started. Look at ways to understand and respond to supply chain risk. So here's a quick agenda of what we're going to go through. First is an introduction to BSI and what we do through our Supply Chain Solutions division, particularly as it relates to supply chain security. Then we're going to go through a couple different threats to the supply chain. The first is violent incidents that we've been seeing in France, an uptick in thefts in Italy, especially in southern Italy, and a shift in theft patterns in the Netherlands. Then we're going to move to different types of problems, such as stowaway threats in the Netherlands, and also security threats in Iraq and Libya, which have recently sort of been in the headlines, but we're really going to examine how it impacts the supply chain in those countries. Then we're going to look at a little bit of a business continuity risk, which we feel has a lot of overlap with security risk in the countries where it occurs. And we're going to look at labor unrest in the supply chain with a case study of Germany and rail strikes last year. Then we're going to go through a couple different ways that we think are best practices for monitoring security in your supply chain, and the best ways that you can keep up to date on security situations in different countries, and the best way to monitor security. So first, an introduction to BSI. BSI was the world's first national standards body in the UK, and we issue over 2,000 standards every year. BSI has also performed more than 150,000 assessments in over 150 countries. In terms of professional services, the BSI Supply Chain Solutions Group, which is what we'll be talking about today, we have over 20 years of experience assessing global supply chain risks, threats, and trends. Our analysts have tracked over 5,000 incidents in 203 different countries. We're the leading provider of supply chain security, intelligence data, and analysis, including to the U.S. government. We're the sole provider of supply chain security intelligence to the U.S. Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program. But we also deliver a whole bunch of other intelligence and auditing around the supply chain in the quality, security, good manufacturing practice, corporate social responsibility, and business continuity arenas. BSI, even though we're called the British Standards Institution, we are a global company. We have major headquarters in London, in Hong Kong, and in Washington, D.C. And as you can see on the map, we have 67 offices worldwide based out of those 3 regional hubs. Today, we're focusing on supply chain security threats in the EMEA region, but we are a global company with global reach both for auditing and for our supply chain security services. So what are those supply chain solutions? It's 2 pieces of software and on-site auditing that we can do in a non-accredited way to help you beef up security at your global operations centers. So the first is the BSI Screen tool, which is where a lot of the intelligence that I'll be talking about today comes from. It's global security monitoring, incident reporting, and in-depth reports about supply chain security and other risks to the supply chain. Our SCM tool goes a step further and helps you evaluate those risks at your supplier sites, at your internal sites, or at any business partner site. Any person that you do business with allows you to view risk throughout the supply chain and takes that country risk and overlays it onto your supply chain. Going even further, we have auditors around the world who can check out the security, situation at different sites throughout your global supply chain, but we can also do audits around corporate social responsibility, quality, environmental sustainability, design or process audits, and business continuity audits. So now we're going to go through some emerging supply chain risks and threats that BSI has seen in the past really quarter, but some of these have been developing longer, and we'll talk later about basically what constitutes a trend for supply chain security and what types of risks that we look at. The first one that I would like to draw attention to is cargo truck hijackings in France. So BSI has long seen hijackings of high-value cargo trucks in France, primarily targeting luxury items like champagne or handbags. Cigarettes and tobacco products are another common target for thieves in France, and especially in the Paris metro area. We also see hijackings and armed robberies of cargo trucks and vans carrying electronics as well. And this is primarily in the Paris metro area. However, recent incidents suggest that there's been an increase in the seriousness of these incidents, if not the actual frequency of them. So just last week, on the 11th of March, we saw that cargo thieves stole $9.5 million of jewelry from 2 trucks near Paris. So it actually occurred about 20 minutes outside of Paris, and 15 to 20 armed men actually attacked a cargo truck that was sitting at a toll booth and they use gas to disable the drivers. This isn't typical for what we see in France because we normally see that there's not hijackings occurring on open road. They normally occur right after a truck has left a warehouse or distribution center, or right as a truck is about to go into a warehouse or distribution center area. So this is a potentially worrying trend. In this case, it was used against armored cars that were carrying jewelry, but it could just as easily be used against cargo trucks. And we have seen these sorts of commando-style, squad-style attacks on cargo trucks in the Paris metro area and also in southern France near Marseille, in particular targeting cigarette trucks. There were two other incidents that we'd like to draw attention to recently. On the 10th of February, there was a hijacking of a truck carrying perfume in the southeast of Paris, which again highlights another trend that we've sort of noticed. In previous years, we've seen more attacks and more hijackings in the area near Charles de Gaulle Airport, particularly at the junction of the A1 and the A3 highways near Aulnay-sous-Bois. However, we're seeing more of a shift to the southeast of Paris, as you can see on this map here, where these two hijackings took place, these two on the 10th and 4th of February. We're seeing more incidents to the southeast of Paris as opposed to the northeast near Charles de Gaulle Airport. The 4th of February was an interesting incident in that there was a hijacking of a truck carrying $22 million of postage stamps. Interesting because you would never think of postage stamps as an item that cargo thieves would steal. It's thought that they actually got the wrong truck, that they were targeting a different type of truck that was carrying other high-value goods, and they found the stamps soon after the hijacking. But again, this just shows you that cargo thieves have insider information about the type of cargo that trucks are carrying in France, are able to specifically target trucks carrying high-value goods, and are able to circumvent security measures that are normally in place for cargo trucks carrying high-value goods. Next, we're going to look at developments in cargo theft in Germany. So BSI recently raised the threat of cargo theft, our threat rating for cargo theft in Germany to high. And on the left there, you can see a distribution of incidents within the country. So BSI noted both an increased number and increased value in cargo thefts that we were seeing in the country. This is where I'd like to stress that it's not just about the number or frequency of incidents. It's about the type of incidents, where and how those incidents are occurring, and the methods that are used in those incidents that would cause us to raise our threat rating. But just in terms of the value of incidents, we look at the median value of incidents or items that were stolen in thefts, and it increased from $39,000 to $49,000 between 2013 and 2014, which suggests that thieves are targeting higher valued commodities. In addition, we saw a number of really high value single thefts, including $2.91 million worth of beer that was stolen from a warehouse right after Germany's World Cup victory, and a warehouse theft involving pharmaceuticals in which over $1 million worth of pharmaceuticals were stolen. We're also seeing the emergence of more sophisticated cargo theft gangs in Germany, where previously we see a lot of pilferage incidents. We're now seeing larger gangs, including in December an 11-person cargo theft gang that was arrested in the country, which is relatively rare. Hijackings as well are still rare. However, we did record a hijacking near Berlin of a van, I believe it was, carrying cigarettes in January. You still see primarily pilferage with full trailer and warehouse theft increasing. We're also seeing the spread of incidents throughout Germany increase. So traditionally, we've seen a lot of cargo theft incidents in the North Rhine-Westphalia, Hesse, and Lower Saxony area of Western Germany, which on this map you can see is still very red. But we're also seeing a shift towards other areas farther east in the country, in particular Western Bavaria, Thuringia, and Saxony-Anhalt. So just in one area of Saxony-Anhalt, in Borde, the local law enforcement reported that there had been 107 thefts alongside a single stretch of the A2 and A14 highways, which gives you an indication of increasing frequency in these areas in central and sort of closer to eastern Germany. So next we're going to talk about how certain environmental factors can influence cargo theft and cargo-related crime as well, with a focus on Italy. So as we were saying earlier, we look also at methods and the severity of incidents, but we look at the environment in which these cargo thefts are occurring. Is organized crime or corruption a problem in these areas? And for Italy, that's certainly the case, especially in southern Italy. So BSI has seen a rash of thefts in southern Italy since January, primarily targeting pharmaceuticals. but cigarettes and fuel have also been targeted, in addition to high-value goods such as perfume. So most of the thefts have been in the Apulia region of southeastern Italy. It's kind of the heel of the boot, if you can see it on the map there. And that's part of an overall increase in cargo theft, in particular in the Foggia and Barletta-Andria-Trani provinces in northern Apulia. You can see Foggia, the actual city there on the map, in Barletta. So we're seeing a lot of thefts along the A14 and the SP231 roads, which basically run parallel to each other in those two parts of the Apulia region. We've also seen other pharmaceutical thefts in particular since the beginning of the year that have taken place in Abruzzo, Calabria, Umbria, and Campania. So Campania you'll see near where Naples is, and that's also where the largest single incidents that we've recorded in this recent uptick took place, where $1.16 million worth of cancer fighting and over-the-counter drugs were hijacked north of Naples. They were later found in a couple different warehouses around the Naples area. We've also seen cases where drugs that were stolen in Apulia, near Bari and other areas in northern Apulia, where those drugs have actually been recovered near Naples, which suggests that they're being trafficked there, laundered back into the legitimate supply chain. Also last year we saw cases in which drugs that were stolen in southern Italy were found in countries such as Germany and the United Kingdom after going through false distributors in Eastern Europe. So that may still be occurring, even though this sort of high-profile example was discovered and shut down last year. So looking at the organized crime environment in Italy, in southern Italy in particular, our analysis of mafia-related seizures suggests that certain areas have a higher risk of mafia infiltration into the transportation industry. So there's a couple different groups that are involved in infiltrating the supply chain in southern Italy from an organized crime perspective. So there's mafias or organized criminal groups that are based in Naples, in Calabria, which is sort of the foot of the boot, and in Sicily. The most famous of the groups is probably in Sicily, but all of the groups are involved in sort of exploiting the supply chain, both for theft, for smuggling of stolen goods, and for drugs and arms smuggling. And you'll see a lot of times that this activity is concentrated around port areas. So Gioia Tauro is the major port in southern Italy, but we also see criminal activity at ports in Sicily as well. So here's just a few recent cases from the end of last year. On November 20th, there were 23 people arrested for using trucking firms as front companies in Catania in Sicily. In October, we had the seizure of mafia-owned trucking companies that transported produce without the actual consumers knowing, from Sicily to Naples. And then on October 21st, just the day before, there were 23 different companies that were seized by the Italian government and Italian authorities near Gioia Tauro, which is Italy's largest port, for mafia associations, and they were being used basically as fronts for drug trafficking. So thefts perpetrated by organized criminal groups are also common in these areas. You see especially in the area near the port near Naples, and in ports near Sicily as well. You also see truck hijackings, which may be connected to organized crime groups in Apulia and near Naples. So what we're going to do now is basically run through a case study of one particular organized criminal group that was able to steal a total of $6.8 million worth of pharmaceuticals throughout 2014. So the thefts took place in 9 different regions of Italy, which again shows you that even if these groups are based in southern Italy, they may be active throughout the entire country. So the thefts took place in 9 different regions, as you can see here on the map at the right. But the group was actually based in Naples and Bari, and they organized all of their activity out of there. So Naples, you can see, is in the southern Campania region on the western coast. Bari is on the eastern coast in the south there. And they used very sophisticated methodology to carry out these thefts. They had insider information about what drugs were stored at which facilities, and they were targeting specific drugs that they knew could get them high value on the black market or high value on foreign markets, such as oncology drugs, anti-cancer drugs, and other sort of lifestyle drugs such as Viagra, which have a high resale value. And the group used secure faxes to communicate between the people that were actually going to carry out the theft and the people that had information about what commodities were stored where. The only reason this group was caught is because the Italian police found and decoded the last page of one of these secure faxes. So the faxes would say where the facility was, what type of drugs were stored there, and had some insider information about when guards were on duty, what types of cameras were used at the facility, and the location of the cameras at those different facilities. What would happen then with these group of 6 people who carried out the thefts is they would spend 4 whole days observing the facility before the theft. They would get a hotel that was located near the warehouse, and they would just spend all day observing the ins and outs of the employees going into and out of the warehouses, what trucks were coming into and out of the warehouse or distribution facility at certain times, before finally carrying out the theft, where they were able to disable alarm systems, disable CCTV systems, and then once the drugs were taken, they were stolen, and the sale of the drugs was arranged in Bari, which was one of their operational headquarters. This incident basically just highlights the sophistication and geographic scope of thieves targeting pharmaceuticals in Italy, but we believe that this also happens for other types of goods as well, because we've seen things like cigarettes that are stolen and then sold in other locations in southern Italy. And cargo theft actually occurs with the most frequency in areas near Milan, up in northern Italy, and in some cases those goods are then recovered in southern Italy, where we believe they're being sold. Another thing that we look at in order to sort of determine the risk of security threats in a country is what law enforcement is doing in a particular country. So this is actually something that I prepared early in 2014 that talked about certain measures that the police in the Netherlands were taking to try to decrease cargo theft in their country. So I'll emphasize again, incident numbers are only part of the story. The factors that are driving declines or increases can help predict decreases in other countries. Or in other areas of a single country. So it's not enough just to look at incident reports and incident numbers. You need to know much more about the environment in which these crimes are occurring. So the Netherlands has particularly proactive law enforcement where the officers work very closely with industry. There's very high recovery rates for stolen cargo in the Netherlands. As many as 75% of all stolen cargo trucks are recovered. There's frequent patrols in high-risk areas. The police in the Netherlands keep very good statistics so they know which areas are particularly high-risk areas. And they're really looking towards more permanent measures. It's not just patrols along roadsides. It's also building more secure parking spaces or having police patrol individual parking areas they know are high risk. But again, all of these are based around making parking areas more secure, which, as we'll see in the next slide, is a very relevant sort of concern for what we're about to talk about. This also helps prevent the sort of migration of cargo crime to new areas, because what we've seen in some countries, particularly in Belgium, is that if police start patrolling along one highway or they build secure parking on one highway, cargo thieves just move to another highway. So in the Netherlands, they're more proactive about trying to make sure they're in as many places as possible. The best way that they have done that is this thing called the Secure Lane program, which includes the installation of CCTV in high-risk areas with automatic license plate recognition, the route between Rotterdam, which is obviously the major port in the Netherlands, and Venlo, which is a major logistics hub that serves the sort of Rhineland area of Germany and most of Belgium and the Netherlands. That entire route now has CCTV monitoring on it, and a large number of additional safe parking areas have been built throughout the Netherlands, including at Schiphol Airport, which was previously a known cargo theft hotspot. So me sitting at my desk in early 2014 looking at all these security measures that the police in Netherlands were undertaking, they're all very focused on parking areas. And pilferage had been a major problem in the Netherlands. So we may see that cargo theft, the sheer number of incidents declines, but it could also migrate to different types or different methods of cargo theft. So that is exactly what we saw. We saw that the overall number of cargo thefts declined 23% in 2014. However, that decline was mostly a decline in pilferage and slash and grab incidents, in which cargo thieves will go into a parking area, they'll slash the sides of trailers and pull out whatever they want. As we said earlier, the security arrangements that I just mentioned are mostly geared around stopping those types of thefts. And sure enough, those types of thefts declined. But the decline in the overall number of cargo thefts concealed a sort of shift in tactics in methods that cargo thieves started to use. The number of reported fictitious pickups, which was not really seen that commonly in the Netherlands, we've seen in other countries like the UK or Germany before, but it increased from 6 to 23 in 2014. And we believe that this particular type of cargo theft is underreported. So in a fictitious pickup, you basically have the cargo thieves show up at a legitimate trucking facility. They say that here I'm here to take the load, here's all my documents. They produce fake documents, and then they just sort of take off with the whatever cargo they can get. So that's one way to get around increased security at parking areas, is to start using more techniques that involve deception. We've also seen that the theft of entire vehicles, not just pilferage from vehicles, increased 20% in the Netherlands in 2014. So the reason that I think this is occurring is that thieves have more of a sort of all or nothing mentality. They're like, well, if we're going to steal something, we might as well steal the entire truck because of the heightened security measures. Or they're stealing the entire trucks from places that aren't parking areas like city streets or areas near ports, for example. And these thefts primarily target clothing and electronics shipments. So again, if you just looked at incident numbers, you'd say, well, the Netherlands is getting more secure, it's getting safer. When really that's not so much the case. Year over year, over the past 10 years or so, we've seen a serious decrease in the number of incidents in the Netherlands, but really we're seeing that cargo theft is also shifting in terms of methods and tactics that are being used. And really, if you think about it, this may be more serious of a concern for companies because there's whole trucks that are being stolen. It's not just small pilferage incidents. The average value or median value of a cargo theft may actually be increasing in the Netherlands, which means more losses for your company. Related to that, we're also seeing the emergence of a new modus operandi or method that cargo thieves are using throughout Europe. BSI has recorded what we call moving truck thefts in Romania, Germany, and Russia, in addition to a number of South American countries. So in this type of theft, the truck is moving along the highway at 60, 70, 80 kilometers per hour. It's going pretty fast. The thieves will have two cars that they're using. One car will get in front of the cargo truck and slow down to force the cargo truck to slow down. The other car will come up behind the cargo truck. One of the thieves will get up on the roof of the vehicle or the hood of the vehicle, open the door while the truck is still moving, and then remove boxes or pallets, whatever it may be, from the cargo truck and hand them back to his accomplices in the car that's behind the cargo truck. Really dramatic incident, kind of makes headlines wherever it's seen, and honestly kind of impressive if you really think about it. But we've recently seen the emergence of this tactic in Ireland, of all places, which doesn't have a particularly high rate of cargo theft. There was an incident in which 100,000 euros worth of cigarettes were stolen on a highway moving right through the middle of the country, sort of going west from Dublin. The entire theft happened at speeds of 80 kilometers an hour. So use of this tactic, as I was saying earlier, may be a response to increased security measures at parking areas across Europe. And we're seeing it in areas where you wouldn't expect it as much, such as Germany or Ireland. We're also seeing other types of thefts as well. In the United Kingdom, for example, we've seen cases of what we call false delivery thefts, where cargo thieves get the phone number of a cargo truck driver, call him up and say, well, your delivery location has now changed. Meet us at this warehouse. So the cargo truck driver drives to the warehouse, and then the thieves, still pretending to be legitimate warehouse employees, unload the entire load. And unbeknownst to the cargo truck driver, they're actually thieves, and they take the entire load. We've seen use of that tactic in Russia as well, where cargo thieves are being redirected to new warehouses. Again, this stresses the importance of having protocols in place for who has the authority to change routes. Detailing to the cargo truck driver, this is the route. You should not, absolutely under no circumstances, deviate from that route. But again, we're seeing this in response to increased security at parking areas. And it's another thing, too, that you can't just get a sense for from looking at incident numbers. You need to know the details of these incidents and have an understanding of the changing cargo theft threat environment as a whole in order to understand why and how these things are happening. Another case where we're seeing a particular type of incident increase in frequency is with stowaway introduction in the Netherlands. So most of the media attention has focused on the migrant crisis at Calais. There's large groups of normally young men from countries such as Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan that are just waiting around near Calais and forcing themselves into cargo trucks, jumping onto the undersides of cargo trucks, intimidating drivers to force them into cargo trucks, and then sailing across the English Channel to the United Kingdom. That's been happening for years at the port of Calais, and it sort of came to a head last year where the migrants actually forced the port to close for a day or two because they were just swarming the facility. But what we're seeing as well is that the number of these incidents is increasing in places such as the Netherlands as well. So most of the discoveries that we've seen in the Netherlands have been at the Hook of Holland part of the port of Rotterdam. But that's just where the discoveries occur. That doesn't necessarily mean that the stowaways are being introduced into cargo in those areas. We believe that most of that is happening near the logistics hub of Venlo in eastern eastern Netherlands near the German border, and in other areas near the German border. So we saw 201 discoveries of stowaways in the Netherlands in 2013 and 2014, and this particularly ramped up in 2014 when nearly 2/3 of the discoveries actually occurred in the year 2014. So what we've seen is an overall increase in the number of migrants that are trying to stow away on these cargo trucks at ports throughout, really across the English Channel. But in particular, we're seeing an increase in the Netherlands, which previously did not have a problem with these types of incidents. So beyond just sort of the potential risk to the security of cargo and the integrity of your cargo, the United Kingdom levies really heavy fines on cargo truck drivers and companies that are found with stowaways in their cargo truckloads. And also a lot of times if the shipment is carrying food and they find stowaways in it, the entire load is lost because they can't guarantee the integrity of the food that was stored in there with the migrants who have stowed away. So in addition to just the sort of integrity of security, it can also lead to very real financial loss for companies if this is a serious problem for them in these areas. This has been in the news recently, the situation in Libya and Iraq. Constant political instability in Libya and also in Iraq. And this again is where you can't just look at incident numbers or the location of incidents. You need to understand the political stability or the overall operating environment in a country like Libya in order to understand the threat to cargo there. So fighting between rival armed groups and the government has led to supply chain interruptions throughout Libya. The most important impact of that is that it's largely halted international air traffic from the main airport of Tripoli Airport. Egypt has also stated that it has closed airspace to flights from Libya, and it's unclear if that restriction has been loosened. So any air cargo into or out of Libya may be extremely delayed or impossible to get into or out of the country. Surprisingly, ports in the country have been less affected. The port of Tripoli remains open, although we have seen open gun battles between the government and smugglers and militants at the port of Benghazi. So even though these ports remain open, technically open, they may still be extremely high risk, and it's probably not advisable to try and ship into and out of them. Particular industries have also come under fire in Libya. The oil industry in particular, they've seen closures of oil facilities and sort of constant closures and reopenings of those facilities due to fighting between rival armed groups. We've also seen attacks at border crossings in the past year, especially near the Egyptian border, attacks on cargo trucks and attacks on the border crossings themselves, which indicates that there may be some degree of risk, particularly at the border with Egypt. The other headline-making story in the past year was the rise of ISIS in Iraq. And we've seen that ISIS targets the supply chain as a source of revenue in Iraq in a number of different ways. The first is through cargo truck driver kidnappings. There was the well-known case where they kidnapped over 30 Turkish truck drivers and then held them for ransom. It's unclear in that case if the ransom was actually paid. But I think that ISIS sees that as sort of a strategy that they can use to raise money for the group. The group also controls some routes to Jordan and makes cargo truck drivers pay tolls and fees along those routes, in addition to areas through northwest Iraq that they control. It's sort of the same situation. The Qasr port in southern Iraq is not threatened by ISIS. It's too far south, but we have seen there's very high levels of corruption at that port, and we've seen arms trafficking go through that port as well, with arms that were bound for Syria from Iran. So, even though there's no threat of ISIS in that area, the Iraqi government is still extremely corrupt. There's poor rule of law in the country. They're very not particularly good at keeping control of illegal criminal activity, including potentially theft activity in the country. So any cargo that's really near those major cargo transit areas in southern Iraq or Baghdad International Airport, which has also been targeted for attacks, may still be at risk, even if not from ISIS. We have seen attacks at Baghdad Airport, more isolated attacks, not so much a sort of full-on armed assault. But again, that should be considered an area of high risk as well. So in addition to actual direct threats to the security or integrity of your supply chain from cargo theft or terrorist attacks, as we saw from ISIS, labor unrest can also threaten the integrity and resiliency of your supply chain. We've also seen cases as well where labor unrest, trucks are forced to stop at borders or other crossing points or other ports and loading areas, and that's where a lot of theft happens because cargo trucks are just sitting there. Probably the best recent example is actually in the United States, where we saw at West Coast ports, there was a stoppage of cargo movement at West Coast ports in the United States. A lot of cargo theft, significant portion of cargo theft on the West Coast of the United States happens in Southern California. So we saw sort of an uptick in cargo theft in those areas as well. Europe's a little bit of a different story. So strikes have a direct impact on the movement of cargo. We saw just today, actually, and towards the beginning of this week, there's a cargo truck driver strike in France. We've seen metal worker strikes in Germany that have a direct impact on the supply chain earlier this year. And also last year in Italy, there was a whole series of logistics worker strikes, particularly in the area near Bologna. In Germany, train driver and airline strikes affected air cargo and train cargo, which we'll take a closer look at in a minute. In France, you saw strikes by airlines there. Belgium, you had a general strike which actually closed the port of Antwerp for several days and made it so that no cargo could move in and out of there towards the end of the year last year. So just looking at these numbers here in terms of union membership, you would think that unions in Europe are on the wane. Membership is down across the board, and we see that companies are more willing to wait out strikes. That was the case with the Air France strikes last year. The employers said, okay, fine, we'll just wait out this strike. We know that these labor unions don't have the power that they used to. And the public is on our side. They're upset with the unions. They don't like the strike. So in the long term, that may mean that there may at some point be fewer strikes. In the short term, it means that there's a lot more disruption that's happening because companies are less willing to just give in to union demands anymore, which means that these disruptions will persist. So even though the actual number of union members are declining, there's a large number of employees in Europe that are still covered by collective bargaining agreements. And the decline of these mainstream unions has led to the rise of more sort of radical splinter unions, like this Confederazione dei Comitati di Base in Italy, formed in the 1980s and is now highly active in labor strikes that block trade in the northern Italian hubs of Bologna and Milan. So the Bologna Interporto is a big logistics hub, a big logistics area, and they frequently carry out strikes in those areas. So you're seeing a movement away from the sort of large, broad-based labor unions to more specific, smaller ones that are more willing to carry out strikes in specific industries. Particularly for the Interporto area in Bologna, we've seen strikes there, but we've also seen cargo theft gangs that operated exclusively, basically, in that logistics area. There was one group that was arrested about 2 weeks ago that basically solely carried out thefts in that area. So at times when there are strikes and cargo is delayed or sitting there for longer periods of time, that puts it at risk for theft as well. So now we're just going to work through sort of one specific case study of labor unrest in Europe and how it affected the supply chain. So towards the end of the year last year, in October and November, there were strikes by German rail workers. Germany is the world's fourth largest economy. It has a dense interconnected transport network, and 17% of all cargo is carried by rail, which may not seem like very much, but by European standards, it's actually relatively high. It's much higher than the percentage that is carried by rail in France or Italy or the United Kingdom. And most importantly, the goods that are carried by rail are normally primary goods that are needed for the production of other products. As you can see at the left, these are the primary goods that are carried by rail in Germany. There's coal, steel, including 50% of all the steel that is produced in Germany is carried by rail, paper products, and automobile and automotive products, which is obviously a major industry for Germany, which means that if rail transport is stopped, even though it's only 17% of all cargo, it's a lot of the component goods or basic materials that are needed to make other goods, which means that these strikes have significant knock-on effects. And an ongoing labor dispute has led to periodic strikes. Rail strikes in early November cost $125 million each day, and they went on for 4 or 5 days. So the underlying issue that caused these strikes has actually not been resolved yet, and there's been talk recently that rail workers in Germany will go on strike again, which again may endanger cargo, the movement of cargo throughout the country. So why was the rail strike such a big deal? We've already talked about how a lot of the goods that are carried by rail are primary goods. They're used for the production of other types of goods. In this case, many companies were unable to shift from rail transportation, which caused major delays. This is another reason why I know it may seem that you don't need to really know the arcane details of union negotiations in Europe, but it can really help in terms of preparing your company for labor strikes, preparing them for business continuity interruptions. Because a lot of companies that knew the strike was coming or thought that the strike was coming took out insurance or on their loads or arranged for alternate types of transportation, and those companies were largely shielded from the impacts of the strike. This was particularly true in the chemical industry, basic chemicals. German law requires that certain types of chemicals and dangerous goods be carried by rail. So in that industry in particular, we saw a lot of major interruptions to cargo transportation. As I mentioned above, some companies secured trucking contracts ahead of the strikes, which underscores the importance of business continuity monitoring. In addition to the actual effect on rail, we have good statistics about the knock-on effects of the strike, the lingering effects of the strike. So it increased traffic on the road by 64% in Frankfurt and 30% on average across Germany, which led to delays on roads, which means more stops on roads, and particularly in high-risk theft areas in Germany may mean more theft on the roads. Even the days after the strike, the railways only ran at 60% of capacity, which highlights a sort of lagging recovery time. And as you can see at the right here, there's a couple of reasons why it's not so easy to just shift from rail transportation, particularly in November, which is the time before Christmas. Trucking companies were already stretched. Trains can carry larger quantities of goods, so for every train worth of goods that you had, you would need 5 or 6 trucks to carry the same amount, which can be difficult to arrange on short notice. And many areas of Germany, even though it has a very good river waterway transportation system, many areas still can't be accessed by water, and you would need a train to get there. So again, this just highlights how, in some cases, business continuity issues can be security issues. And even if they're not security issues directly, they're still important to the overall resilience of your business. And it's a reason why you should monitor these types of risks as well, even if your remit is primarily security. So now we're going to look at a few different ways that you can monitor security risk in your supply chain and some best practices that BSI and our intelligence analysts feel are the best ways to monitor risk in your supply chain. The first is that you should actually evaluate country risk on a country-by-country basis. As you can see here, these are some screenshots from the risk maps that we have in our BSI screen system. And you'll see that across different types of risks, there's different types of threats. So those little radio dials on there are different incidents that we've seen recently. And you can see the one at the top right is our cargo disruption risk map. The one at the bottom left is our natural disaster risk map. And those two maps look radically different. And if you were to break down the different components of risk, hijackings versus pilferage, you would see that risk varies by different countries. Many people take a sort of regional approach. They use the same security measures throughout Europe, or they think, okay, Europe's pretty safe. There's not the type of political instability that you see in a country like Libya or Iraq, so we should use sort of lower security measures, when really there's major differences insecurity even within Europe. So Italy is much more risky than Denmark, for example, which may leave cargo in certain countries exposed, or it could mean, even more importantly, that your company is underspending in certain high-risk countries and overspending in low-risk countries. So as I was saying as well, you should pay attention to different levels of risk for different types of threats. The threat of hijacking may be higher, as we talked about in France, for certain countries versus pilferage in other countries. In Spain, for example, warehouses are targeted more frequently than I believe in any other European country. We see more frequent targeting of warehouses, whereas in Germany, for example, there's a lot more targeting of trucks. You should also differentiate between security and business continuity risks, as I've sort of tried to draw out earlier in this presentation, and think about the ways that business continuity risk can also affect security. One final thing is that you may be relying on a number of different sources for your risk information, but relying on one that has country risk ratings can help eliminate some of the confusion and enhance decision making within your organization. So you may ask, the guy who's in charge of security in Kenya, for example, how do you feel about security in Kenya? And he may give you an answer, but he has no basis for comparison with Italy or Germany, say. So if you have a single scale that you use for risk, it can help with those cross-country comparisons and determining what security measures you should use in each individual country. So here are some factors that we think that you should take into account. Not just an overall country rating, but specific geographic areas within a country, including regions, cities, and highways or roads where theft is more common. As we have discussed for both places such as France and Italy, there's certain highways that are higher risk. There's certain commodities that are higher risk, because they're targeted more frequently by thieves. We've also just touched on already modality targeting. Is it warehouses or trucks that are being targeted? One important thing that we haven't touched on to this point is security measures. The ability of thieves to overcome things like GPS tracking or security escorts. We've seen jamming of GPS in a number of different European countries, including Russia, Spain, and Italy. So you may want to go one step further in those countries if even security escorts aren't enough, if even GPS tracking isn't enough, and knowing about where those types of security countermeasures may not be sufficient is important as well. It can also help you fine-tune your spending on security as well. As we talked about, you should know the organized crime and corruption environment that's present in the country, which may increase the risk of criminal infiltration of the supply chain or of actual cargo theft itself in particular areas. As we were saying above as well, certain commodities are more frequently stolen than others. And probably the most important point that I would want people to take away from this presentation is that you shouldn't just look at incident numbers or incident reporting. You should look at the methods that thieves are using and how different law enforcement strategies may interact with the methods that cargo thieves choose to use in different countries. Hijackings as well, a particular more violent type of crime that we think you should probably pay particular attention to. And even within Europe, there's significant variation of where hijackings take place. So now we're going to look a little bit more at sort of doing a sort of trend analysis, or what basically constitutes a shift in real security conditions in a country and what is just a short-term uptick. So on the lowest level, you have incident reporting. You may get daily updates about risk, potentially from the Screen tool, which has information every day about cargo thefts that are taking place in different countries with details of those incidents. From there, you may be able to divine certain short-term trends, such as upticks in countries that are already dangerous. So Italy is rated severe for cargo theft, but we know that in the past 2 months, we've seen an uptick in these particular areas of Italy. It also allows you to place those incidents that you're seeing in context. So instead of just being shot out, here's an incident here, here's an incident there, you can you want to try and plot them either, plot them on a map, plot them in some sort of database or some way that you can determine whether there's a trend occurring, whether incidents are increasing or decreasing. You also want to look at longer term trends, which may mean that there's a significant change in the cargo theft threat environment in a country, and this may be because of new methods or new areas, as I talked about with the Germany example. So for incident reporting from the Screen system, you would be able to get same-day reports to your email inbox whenever an incident occurs. It would include precise details of where the hijacking occurred, as you can see with this incident from South Africa. It occurred on the R21 highway in northern Soweto, and the specific goods that were targeted, cigarettes and computers. It'll also tell you about the methods or security measures that were used in each individual incident, which again may not amount to a trend, but it's still good to know if GPS jamming, for example, was used. In some cases, so BSI will give you analysis about the different incidents that have taken place and place it in the broader context of what's happening in the country. From there, you may be able to look at short-term trends, such as the one that I talked about with Italy. You can see here the risk of cargo theft throughout Italy. And Apulia is already severe, already red on this map, but in particular, we saw an uptick in these two areas of Apulia. So BSI would note those types of trends, and those trends would be drawn from our incident database, which includes hundreds of different incidents that we're tracking on a day-to-day basis. Also, this may be related to broader outside trends, such as the drift of organized criminal activity or increasing cooperation between organized criminal groups, which can act as a driver of those types of activities, which again, you would want to pay attention to, and that BSI analysis can help draw some of your attention to that. The final thing I'll talk about is more serious long-term trends. So this is actually not an example from EMEA, but it's a very good one nonetheless. BSI increased India's cargo theft threat rating from elevated to high in the third quarter of 2014 for a couple of different reasons. We saw increasing frequency of incidents throughout India. We also saw increasing sophistication. Those false delivery thefts that I mentioned have also been occurring in India. We saw more warehouse thefts and more sophisticated warehouse thefts than we previously saw, and warehouses typically had higher levels of security than cargo trucks did in India, which means that cargo thefts are becoming more sophisticated, a more organized activity in India. We also saw a greater spread of incidents from outside of the major urban areas to minor urban areas and also other areas along roads where we previously had not seen cargo thefts. And again, these were sustained trends that we saw over several quarters leading up to the third quarter of 2014, which led us to change the cargo theft rating for India from elevated to high. So that's just an example of the sort of long-term trend analysis that you can look at to sort of determine what security measures you should use in a particular country, or how much or how little you should spend in a particular country. Again, I would stress that you don't want to look at individual incidents and say, oh my goodness, there's been 4 incidents in this one part of Germany in the past week. That may be indicative of a short-term trend, but doesn't necessarily mean that the overall security environment in Germany or India, for example, has changed substantially. You want to look to more long-term information, year-over-year increases or decreases in thefts, increasing sophistication, increasing geographic spread of incidents to really make a determination of where the threat has actually increased or decreased.